give the floor to His Excellency Nabil Amal, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Migration and Tunisia and Abroad of Tunisia. You have the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as I begin my statement, I would like to congratulate Mr. Dennis Francis and, through him, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on his presidency of the General Assembly at the 78th session. I wish him every success in conducting our work, and I can assure him of our support for his vision, and that is prosperity, growth, and sustainability. I would also like to express to Mr. Sabakorosi, President of the 77th session, my deep gratitude and congratulations for an excellent, for a job well done. I would like to reiterate our support and acknowledgement for the efforts of the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and for his excellent initiative to promote multilateral action. Mr. President, our world today is experiencing a very delicate page in its history where crises and challenges are growing at a time when wars and conflicts are getting worse, and when geopolitical divisions are evident, and where we see a slowing of the implementation of SDGs, and the crisis of indebtedness of developing countries is worsening, where poverty and hunger is increasing, and where the gap between the North and the South is increasing, without even mentioning the unprecedented increase in refugees and migrants and the continuing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the climate crisis. Is this really the world to which we aspire after almost 8 decades since the creation of the United Nations? This is an image that is very distant from the goals and values that this organization is based on. That being said, we call on the creation of new approaches and new means that are more effective to meet the challenges of today. We also call on strengthening cooperation and solidarity at the international level on the basis of common but shared responsibility. We would also like to reiterate the need to truly respect the UN Charter, international law, human rights, by everyone, without politicizing them. That is the way to bolster trust among states and to sustain multilateral action and to achieve security, peace, and development. With this in mind, we hope that this session will be a historical turning point, a new start for the multilateral system and for international cooperation as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, hundreds of millions of people had great hopes in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And yet, what has been achieved to date is significantly below what was hoped for. Bearing that in mind, Tunisia supports the relaunch efforts of the Secretary General to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular practical steps that seek to alleviate the lack of funding. We also welcome the fact that the Secretary General has set up a response group to the global crises, the financing crisis, food crisis, energy crisis, in order to deal with the impact of the war in Ukraine on food and energy. In this context, we would like to recall the appeal of President Kais Saied of Tunisia during the Summit of Food Systems in Rome to create a strategic stockpile of grain, cereals for the world, which we could use when necessary. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it is clear that the international monetary system has failed. This system, which was created following World War II to provide a safety net for the world, to guarantee lasting financing for development and for the least developed countries. This system, quite to the contrary, has disappointed and has abandoned these countries. Quite even worse, this system has contributed to increasing the gap between advanced countries and developing countries. These developing countries face very difficult choices today, which consist of sharing a large part of their resources to reimburse their debt and servicing the debt, rather than responding to the vital needs of their populations. This is why today we call for substantive reforms of the international financial system and to change global economic governance. This is an essential priority to overcome current difficulties and to pave the way for a more fair system that invests in sustainable development and in future generations. Furthermore, we call on taking serious steps to ensure a recovery of funds looted abroad, to help countries that have been pillaged so that they can base their efforts on their own resources. It's also important to avoid this kind of violations in the future. Mr. President, what the world is experiencing today, impact of climate change, deterioration of ecosystems, a worsening of natural disasters, all this forces all of us to confront these challenges urgently. That is the absolute priority for us today, and this in spite of the fact that our countries are not responsible for the current situation of our planet. With that in mind, Tunisia welcomes the initiative of the Secretary General, who called for holding of a summit for a climate ambitions action summit. And in this context, we reiterate the need to continue international efforts and step up these efforts to achieve the needed solutions. All responsible actors should assume their responsibility by providing climate funding to countries who are experiencing the worst damage from the climate crisis. Mr. President, illegal migration has worsened in our geographical area due to the inadequate development of many African states, due to conflicts that are continuing, due to the effects of climate change, without mentioning the fact that criminal networks are exploiting the precarious conditions of thousands of people who are seeking better opportunities in life and are trafficking these people, whether this is from the south of the Mediterranean to the north of the Mediterranean or from sub-Saharan Africa, while reiterating the need to adopt a global approach to tackle this issue of illegal migration, which is by focusing on its root causes rather than simply its consequences, while saying that we once again would like to reiterate the need for all parties to assume their responsibility, origin countries, transit countries, and destination countries, as well as regional and international organizations. And in this context, we call on the continuation of the process of the International Conference on Development and Migration, which started in Rome, based on a Tunisian and Italian initiative. Tunisia has always dealt with this issue of illegal migration within its possibilities, and given its long standing attachment to human rights and in fulfilling its international obligations. And we can assure you that Tunisia will not accept accept the arrival of illegal immigrants, a concealed kind of arrival of illegal immigrants. Furthermore, we condemn all political exploitation or media exploitation that is irresponsible of the suffering of the victims of illegal migrants for political purposes. Mr. President, Tunisia has not been an exception to what the world has experienced and continues to experience in terms of challenges, economic challenges, social challenges, living conditions. And we, in spite of these current difficulties, we intend to overcome these difficulties, strengthen our resilience and sustainability in cooperation with our friends and partners while respecting the principles and the guiding principles of our national policies and national destiny. We will continue tirelessly with the process of reform and strengthening good governance and combating corruption in order to strengthen and fine-tune our democracy, the performance of our state institutions, and to put an end to the irresponsible political manipulations that we've seen over the past 10 years. This is all in response to the aspirations of the Tunisian people, who very sincerely on the 25th of July of 2021 expressed their will. The people are attached to their aspirations until this process of reform is completed, in spite of challenges and pressure. We're also intend to strengthen our resilience in the face of challenges, including regional and global challenges, lack of funding, the effects of climate change, the consequences of COVID-19, and our country, as part of a presidential initiative, was the first to call on strengthening international solidarity to combat COVID-19, and that led to the adoption by the Security Council of Resolution 2532, co-sponsored by France. We also will continue our efforts for the empowerment of women and young people to strengthen their participation in public life, in decision-making. We are also working on being successful in our transition to a green economy and blue economy, strengthening digital transformation while providing social protection for all our citizens, and to ensure a fair distribution of the fruits of economic growth. And during this very important period, Tunisia while it will count on its own resources, of course, at the same time we call on our partners to work together constructively as part of our process of reform and modernization, and to support our efforts aimed at economic recovery, based on the link between our common interests and common destinies, as well as based on our intelligent political assessment. Mr. President, Tunisia intends to also support the process of revitalization underway in our organization. In that context, Tunisia has effectively taken part in implementing the Secretary General's report, Our Common Program, and we hope that the Summit of the Future will be an opportunity to reiterate the engagement of everyone to our common principles, to build a secure and lasting future for humankind. This also reflects our vision to create a new global order that is more balanced, where there's no hierarchy among states, because the more there's an absence of justice, the more poverty increases, the more terrorism worsens. We need a new vision, a global vision on issues of security and peace, which takes into account the root causes of instability and the trends towards violence and war. Mr. President, the continuation of the historical justice and suffering imposed on the Palestinian people for over 7 decades of occupation, and its entourage of oppression and atrocities. Oh, this is unacceptable on a legal and a moral level and a human level. It's unacceptable. The same goes for the silence of the international community. Even while the occupation authorities are intent on disregarding international law and its principles and continue to carry out their policy of aggression and settlement building. It is for this reason that we once again call on the Security Council and the international community to assume its responsibility to force the occupation authorities to respect international law in order to achieve a just and peaceful solution based on agreed legal principles that will put an end to the suffering and occupation of the Palestinian people, and it will allow it to recover their legitimate rights, to create an independent, sovereign state that is contiguous geographically in borders of 4th of June 1967 with Jerusalem as its capital. We also call for Palestine to be a fully fledged member of the United Nations. Now, as far as our immediate neighborhood, Tunisia reiterates its commitment to provide all possible assistance to our Libyan neighbors to help them overcome its differences and achieve a political agreement based on an inter-Libyan dialogue with the help of the United Nations to preserve the unity and sovereignty of Libya. We reiterate our rejection of any military solutions and any form of interference into the internal affairs of Libya, whether this interference is direct or indirect. Now, along the same lines, we are in favor of seeing a convergence of UN and international efforts to achieve a political solution both in Syria and Yemen to put an end to the sufferings of these two brethren nations and to bring peace and security to them, to preserve their sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Tunisia also calls on the cessation, an end of the escalation in Sudan, and to focus on dialogue to try to overcome this crisis. We call on the international community and the United Nations to help Africa to rid itself of crises, that constant crises for which this continent is only marginally responsible. We reiterate the need to endow a moral dimension both on economic efforts by taking into account the interests of African countries. In conclusion, Mr. President, allow me to remind us that we are at a crossroads. Given the scale of the risks and challenges that are unprecedented, that affect everyone and that threaten our world and threaten our future generations, the choices we make, which should be based on long-term vision and our engagement to our humanity, based on our belief in our common destiny and our attachment to the UN Charter, to the principle of solidarity and cooperation, and the responsibility. These decisions will play a decisive role to endow the multilateral system with credibility. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Migration and Tunisians abroad of Tunisia.